let's do this. We got thoughts on HCG as a long-term HRT solution, and or as a way to combat post-finasteride syndrome.
Okay, I think as a long-term, like makeshift HRT regimen, I think it's viable pending your testicular health is sufficient to actually respond to it. Because at the end of the day, HCG is just essentially mimicking luteinizing hormone. So if you had a inadequate amount of luteinizing hormone to actually signal to your testes, make X amount of testosterone that we need to feel good, function well, build muscle, etc. Hypothetically, if your pituitary wasn't shooting enough to your testes, you could otherwise use HCG and replicate that to whatever extent you want manually. And as long as testicular health is maintained, I would say it's totally viable. And I think some people may actually prefer it. Now, you're not going to get the same like muscle building potential as you would with actual TRT because you are working within the confines of your testicular capacity. So like ultimately you are just working with what your testicles can actually produce naturally, because it is ultimately just a signal to your testes to produce the testosterone. It's not like you're actually using straight up manual testosterone or anything. So I think it's totally viable though, because some people don't need full-blown TRT and to shut down their whole hypothalamus pituitary testicular axis, like the whole thing, because some people don't have actual failure at the gonad. So it's like if you had an adequate amount of LH and FSH, but you still had a super low test level, that's when it becomes like way more logical to, okay, that's definitely a TRT scenario kind of thing, as opposed to with HCG. You know, if you have totally functioning testes, but just inadequate signaling, that's where an HCG becomes more viable. And I have not seen evidence of long-term desensitization that would otherwise make me caution somebody from using it. Like I have not yet to see somebody who's used it for 5-10 years and all of a sudden their testes stopped responding to the signal. There definitely is literature that if you overdo it though, and you like use too high of a dose, you could otherwise have toxicity, which could potentially damage the testes themselves. But that's where using blood work to actually assess like what your response is to that dose of HCG is totally is warranted and would help kind of flesh out the answer to that. So short answer after a long one is I think it is viable. And as far as how its viability for post-finasteride syndrome, from what I have seen, certain individuals that have this constellation of symptoms that is representative of like post-finasteride syndrome, I have seen success with individuals using HCG, and it seems to be something that could otherwise be superior to even like a actual androgen therapy like testosterone, because in HCG therapy, you are stimulating the whole steroidogenesis cascade, because you are literally telling your testes to use like cholesterol, and downstream to that, that's where all those neurosteroids get converted to, is the upstream start with cholesterol. So downstream, although you are creating testosterone out of the HCG signal, downstream to that, you also have upstream all these satellite shoot off hormones of neurosteroids. So I have seen people have success with it personally, and I do think it is, obviously it's not like an actual diagnosable thing that has a warranted, like, here's the drug to take to fix post-finasteride syndrome. There's no like set in stone clinical guidelines around that, but just anecdotally and what we've seen, at least from what I've heard feedback wise in the Merrick Health community and whatnot, is HCG seems to be viable for certain people. Yes.